Okay, this video is Ancient Greek first. One of the goals of this site is the preservation of Western civilization, and part of preserving Western civilization is young people have to know about it. What's happened to the young people? The reason why you're such a bunch of ignoramuses is it's not just because you got low IQs from the fluoride in the water and stuff like that. It's also because in your history teaching in schools, they've kept the truth from you. They've tried to hide it from you because they don't want you to know how great Western civilization is. Because if you realize how great Western civilization is, then you won't want to put up with all this lefty modernist crapola, okay? So I'm going to teach you a little bit how great Western civilization is. It is completely superior to all other cultures. Multiculturalism is nonsense, okay? The ancient Greeks were by far the best of the ancient civilizations. You can easily confirm this if you just start studying them. It's obvious. And here's a few of their things that they developed and they were first. Will Durant, the great historian, had said, most of the good things in the modern world come from the ancient Greeks other than, the machines. Okay, that was newer, later stuff. Okay, they were the first country to have free speech for their aristocrats. They were the first country to have what we would call a democracy. And that was like in Athens. They experimented with other types of government, like a oligarchy in Sparta and a monarchy in some areas. For example, the first epic poetry, like the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. Okay. The other great epic, of course, is the Aeneid, coming from the Romans. And the Greeks were much better than the Romans. In comparison with the Greeks, the Romans were kind of, these harsh thugs, partially collectivists. They did some good things too. Don't get me wrong. Cicero's magnificent and magnificent architecture. Okay, continuing with the ancient Greek first. They were the first to have a historian in prose. Herodotus is the father of history. He wrote about the Greek war, the Greek victory over Persia. Okay, and the Greeks saw themselves as like, Hercules fighting back against incredible odds to win, as they defeated the Persians, who outnumbered them quite a bit. The first sort of skeptical historian in prose, Thucydides. He wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War, about the war between Sparta and Athens, especially between like around 431 BC to 404 BC. And it was a disaster. It was bad for all of Greece. It's bad when a country has a civil war and fights itself. But anyways, that's a magnificent history. Thucydides was like the Machiavelli of his time, and he was pissed off. He'd been exiled from the Athenian army by Creon, was a jerk, and he was pissed off and wanted to write about it, and he did so. Very penetrating analysis of many events like, Milos, etc. My goodness, it's extraordinary. I read that book back when I was a freshman in college, and I was amazed at how great it was. Okay, they were the first to develop theater. With the drama, tragedies, comedies. They give awards for the best playwright, Greek mythology, it's magnificent. Aeschylus, Aristophanes, the comedic playwright, Euripides, Sophocles, they're all brilliant and magnificent. If you read it, Schopenhauer, the greatest philosopher ever from Germany, said, what was in the water with these ancient Greeks? How did they have so many geniuses in such a small population? It's extraordinary. Percy Bysshe Shelley, the romantic poet from England, said, the most interesting time in all of history is by far the ancient Greeks during their classical period. The time of Pericles, the great theater. And the next thing, of course, is their philosophy. Ancient Greek philosophy is basically ancient philosophy. It's the foundation of all Western philosophy. Alfred North Whitehead had said that all of Western philosophy is just a footnote to Plato. Plato wrote The Great Republic. Plato had experimented with a lot of things. He experimented with the playwright, which later shaped his writing style. He would write his philosophic commentaries in the form of a conversation between Socrates and other people. Okay, he got that from being a playwright. He was a failed playwright, okay? He also had been a bit of a politician, and he had helped out, advise in some other areas, and, they, threw his butt in prison, and he had a rough life, but he learned a lot from it. And then he was very sad when, after the Peloponnesian War, Athens had lost to Sparta, and the new rulers were cruel and unreasonable, and they condemned Socrates to death, okay, 399 BC, and he was pissed off. He said, what type of a city would condemn to die its best citizen? Socrates is the best man in all of Athens. How could this have happened? Magnificent painting of the death of Socrates by Jacques-Louis David. Okay, so I mean, they were big. The pre-Socratics were good philosophers. And then the Socratics, by that we mean Plato, Aristotle, Socrates himself, are the foundation of all Western philosophy. And the Republic is the greatest, individual philosophic book ever written in ancient times. The post-Socratics were also powerful forces in philosophy. They're the foundations of cynicism, skepticism, Epicureanism, and Stoicism. And we think of Epicureanism and Stoicism, especially, of course, in the context of the Romans. Also in the context of Greeks who were slaves of the Romans. Platonic thought is part of the foundation of Christianity. Everybody can talk as much as you want about the Old Testament, but Plato had a tremendous influence on Christianity, as did Aristotle. The New Testament was written in Greek, and that's not by accident, okay? And St. Paul, he traveled all over the place preaching about Christianity. In most places, they just kicked his butt and threw him out. Sometimes they threw him in prison, but he went to Athens, and they said, let us hear what this man has to say, okay? Aristotelianism, basically the way I think of it is Platonism largely went through Augustine, and that is a big part of the style that led to the Reformation and Martin Luther and Protestantism, whereas Aristotelianism was much more free and open-minded in its thinking, and that led to scholasticism with St. Thomas Aquinas, and also with the Italian Renaissance, for example. So basically, I like Aristotelian Christianity, basically Catholicism, a lot better than Protestantism. Of course, the most important thing is, following the words of Christ, but that's worth knowing. Okay, they had the first serious biologist, Aristotle. Aristotle was doing the best he could to make sense of things in his day. He summarized all the worthwhile knowledge of his time. He was not only a biologist, he was great at anything he touched. He's one of the smartest men who ever lived. He summarized all of Greek rhetoric, and that's where people learned how to speak well, from studying Greek rhetoric. Alexander the Great was traveling all around the world, and he would send biology specimens back to Aristotle to study and to classify. Some of the first genius engineers and physicists like Archimedes were developing the early prototypes of machines. The early scientific theory of ideas like the atom and whatnot were developed by the ancient Greeks. Early mathematics like Pythagoras, Pythagorean theorem, and Euclid for geometry, that all came out of the ancient Greeks. Pythagoras also developed the math structure for the idea of the octave in making musical instruments. Pythagoras, put forth the vegetarian diet. He felt people shouldn't eat animal foods because he was concerned that he believed in reincarnation and thought you might be eating a person who was reincarnated as an animal. The Greeks made the first great buildings like the Parthenon. Okay, they built the city on a hill, the Acropolis. They made the first great sculptures. If you look at ancient sculptures, other than the ancient Greeks, they stink. They're all kind of like, like a kid could make them, okay? The ancient Greek sculptures, some of them are still preserved, and some of them are magnificent. The Greeks had the first Olympic Games, and that was a wonderful, popular thing. Greek mythology is the best. I mean, Greek mythology is great. If you want to read Greek mythology, there's tons of good stuff on that subject. I'd recommend you start with Edith Hamilton if you want to learn more about that, but it's magnificent. It's magnificent. It's beyond great. They had, for their time, they were actually known as great warriors. They had a very sophisticated military. Athens had a very sophisticated navy. It's islands, cities, and states. Early medicine was very good for that time with the Asclepius healing centers, with Hippocrates and dietary therapy. So why did the Greeks fall? Well, a common reason why a lot of places fall, they had too much internal bickering, started not getting along with each other. They were weakened by the Peloponnesian War, and this weakening left them unable to adequately unify to fight off King Philip of Macedonia. And then later on, they sort of backed Carthage in its struggle against ancient Rome, and that pissed off the ancient Romans, who also came back and then kicked Greeks' butt because of that. But anyways, I still tell you this. The ancient Greeks are magnificent. Everyone should study them and learn about them. because it shows you to what heights ancient man could soar, and that's an inspiring thing. So anyways, hope you found that interesting.